So for the longest time, I knew that I always wanted to help people. During my teenage years, I wasn't really sure how I was going to do this, but I knew that it was what I needed to be doing. So the first initiative I took doing it was with my first paid job, and that was as a lifeguard with the City of Fresno, the Aquatics Division. This, with all the medical training that came with this, at a very basic and minute level, this was the first instance that really got the wheels turning in my head that maybe I could seek out a public sector job and really get involved and help my community. After this, I graduated high school in 2011 from University High School. That's located on the Fresno State campus. It was during this time that I met a friend. He went by the name of John, and we would eventually get really close. After a while, however, we drifted away, but I still kind of maintained communication with his family, and his brother and I, Matt, would eventually just get real close and really click, and I kind of made my mainstay with them. It was during that time that I started observing his dad help him a lot. The first thing I noticed about Matt, which really drew me in, was that he was in a wheelchair. And one day I remember asking Mark, his dad, if there's anything I could do while I was over at the house to help out. And he told me yeah, and at first it was just little mundane tasks, making him lunch, running errands with him, for him, just doing very simple and very bland household chores. Soon, though, his dad would eventually show me how to do a lot more of the more complicated things, helping him get out of bed, getting him dressed, helping him use the restroom, so on and so forth. So for the next couple of years, I'd spent most of my weekends and all of my summers with Matt and his family, and I was just really starting to become a permanent member of the house. I started a fire academy in 2014, and at the end of that, we had all sat down and talked, and I agreed that I would actually move in and become Matt's caregiver because his brother was moving out and couldn't do it anymore because of a job that he had got. So that just really emphasized where Matt and I were in our friendship. And it was during this time that he had completely changed and rewired how I viewed the world, how I viewed myself, and most importantly, how I viewed those with disabilities. Seeing him every day just completely normalized the notion that we are all as capable as each other and as capable as we make ourselves. I can 100% say that over the course of the time that he and I knew one another, I'd never heard him once complain about his condition, about not being able to walk. He loved football. He never complained about not being able to play football. He didn't even complain about doing things like not being able to eat on his own. He always just saw the silver lining and appreciated the days that he was given, and that really forced and created this organic change in the way I saw the world, and how it taught me to learn how to appreciate the days in the life that I've been given. So also during that time, I picked up a ulterior sport to field hockey called floorball. And during a game, in the midst of a break between the periods, we played with 3 periods. A dear friend of ours named Nils, who was actually the guy who got me into this sport, had a massive heart attack and collapsed in front of us. This brought me back completely to the lifeguard days and all the CPR training I had and everything. And immediately we ran to his side and we began to administer CPR to the best of our abilities. Luckily, a lot of physical therapists played with us, so we kind of all knew what we were doing a little bit. And we started and initiated CPR until the first response crews got there. When they walked in, it was kind of a out-of-body experience. I remember just taking a step back and observing how well they worked together. It was one fire engine with a fire crew of 3, one advanced life support unit from American Ambulance, and I just remember seeing how organically they worked together, and that really got my head turning. And this was my friend on the ground here. This was just so much motivation to really get into the public service sector. I was extremely scared at the time. I watched him in shock, and as they took him out on the gurney and loaded him in the back of the ambulance, I remember just thinking, I need to do more. The worst part about this whole thing was that it all happened in front of his wife and kids, and that too just really kind of kicked me and got my fire going and really initiated my thought and what I needed to do. For a while, I wore this rosary bracelet on my wrist, and I wore it just as a sort of a reminder to focus and push through the negativity and everything that the world presents with to us. And I remember at Nils's funeral, I wanted to say one more thing to his daughters before I made my descent out of the building. And I walked up and I introduced themselves. And the craziest thing happened. They immediately hugged me and thanked me for trying to help their dad and for getting everything done and doing everything that I did. And I remember I just instantly started crying. And with tears in my eyes, I remember taking that bracelet off and explained to them why I wore it and what perseverance meant. And I told them I was wearing it actually while we were doing CPR on their dad. And I remember giving it to the oldest one. And I gave it to them as a notion that their dad would always be with them, because that was the last thing that I owned to make contact with him. So I wanted that to be one of the things that they owned that made contact with him. And I remember just telling them that their father was always going to be watching over them and never to forget how much he loved them and how proud he was of them. And that really started my pursuit. I used Matt as a motivation. I used what happened with Nils as a motivation, and I remember thinking about the cohesion that the fire department and American Ambulance displayed, and those three things really just got everything going. And I knew that I wanted to get in, with the fire department, and that really just got everything where it needed to be. So fast forwarding to August of 2016, this is after my first fire academy. I took off a year of Fresno State, and I enrolled in an emergency medical technician program at Alert Medical. And this simply for the notion that nowadays you just won't get hired without your EMT license. And in the midst of that, I joined and completed a 4-week-long CAL FIRE Wildland Academy that would help me gain potential employment with the upcoming fire season. So both of these extremely strenuous programs, I'd completed both of them. I finished the academy in November and then would eventually graduate the EMT class in December. I did my initial applicatory packet for CAL FIRE for the upcoming season, and I was actually invited to interview in January, so that's when the real work had started. I interviewed early January and waited and waited and waited, and then just the unthinkable happened. Playing floorball again. On February 22nd, about a month after I interviewed, I would eventually take a blow to the knee that would send me into actually the worst place of my life, but at the same time would eventually birth the best version of me. To make the long diagnosis short, after my knee injury, I went and saw my PA, and she would eventually tell me after an MRI that I tore my ACL and meniscus, I fractured 2 bones sitting under my kneecap, and I sprained 2 other ligaments. And when she told me that, I remember holding back tears, just so many tears, just because of how freaked out I was. And I remember asking if there's anything I could do to avoid putting me out of work, because I'd felt good coming out of the interview. I'd talked to a lot of people, and things were looking up as far as employment with CAL FIRE was going. And I remember my PA looking at me in the eye and telling me that in her entire medical professional career, she had never seen such a significant knee injury for someone to be walking around and maintaining movement, and that in order to fight fire in the future, reconstructive surgery was absolutely going to be necessary. So later that week, I collected and met with Dr. Peter Simonian, and we met and had our consultation, and we scheduled the surgery for March 28th, and I started physical therapy. The worst part about this whole thing, the surgery was scheduled on the 27th, and on March 26th, the day before my knee surgery, my world would crumble again, and I got the call. CAL FIRE San Luis was the unit of my dreams, my dream job, my dream station, and they called and offered, just for me to have to tell them that I was unable to take it. Everything that I'd worked for, the entire focus of my adult life, everything in the palm of my hands was ripped out quicker than I grabbed it and taken from me. Then to add insult to injury, my significant other at the time, a girl I had dated for about 2 years to this point, decided that it was time to end our relationship. So it just seemed like it was one mountainous rock after another. So here I was, significant knee injury, brokenhearted, jobless. Weeks go by, I start gaining weight, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm fighting all sorts of addictions, and the only thing that was consistent in my life at the time was my family, and even they had no clue what was going on. it was a feeling of being alone while surrounded by so many. I felt defeated, I felt abused, I felt lied to, I felt heavy. A couple weeks after my surgery, I actually flew to Oregon to see Matt and his family. They had just recently bought a place in Lacombe, and seeing them was the elixir that I'd just been searching for. Seeing Matt and being embraced with nothing but love and their uplifting spirits really just reminded me of what it was like to be cared for by an unbiased family. And I was just able to share everything and opening up with them. It was just very, very therapeutic in the process. And when I would get home, I would see that the trip, taking that trip was just so key. This was the key to my breakthrough. And when I returned home, I did so defeated. I was still heartbroken. I was still jobless, but this was the hungriest I'd ever been for change. Matt and Lisa, for nearly 11 days, reminded me of who I was, who I am, the things that I've accomplished, and to not let what I'd set my mind out to not let go of that. And they just really initiated in me that I wasn't going to succumb to drinking or abusing my pain meds or anything, to that effect. And I wasn't going to let some girl who decided to take advantage of my nature defeat me. And it was ultimately up to me and up to nobody else, that only I could change, and that it was up to me to decide to let my why be greater than my fall. So the very next day, I actually went into the gym, took my shirt off, and I took a picture. And I know that sounds a little erogenous, but I remember thinking to myself that I would never, ever, ever let myself mentally or physically get to that point again. So after that, I immediately stepped on the scale and I recorded the number. 205 pounds, the heaviest I'd ever been. I remember asking myself what happened. I remember asking myself how I could let myself get to this. But then I also remembered it's not about chasing perfection, it's about chasing progress. So I went home, I wrote out a diet, I did as much research as I could about macros and meal prepping. So I started working out, I gave up drinking, put away the pain meds. I stopped thinking about what others were doing, and I started worrying about how I would define me. Not how others would, but I started working out how I wanted to define myself in every situation from here on out. So fast forward, here I am today, talking to you guys. Currently I weigh 161 pounds. I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm in the best place mentally, spiritually that I've ever been. I've embraced the notion of doing what I want because this is what I'm passionate about, and no one else, no matter their opinion on the subject, will ever take what makes me away from me. I've been to the depths of my lowest low. Though it may not be, comparable to what other people have gone through, it might not be as severe as someone else's. This was the point of no return for me, and this is when I decided when I was going to break through. As it stands, I'm currently an employee with American Ambulance. I graduate Fresno State in May with my bachelor's degree in forensic behavioral sciences, and I will test again for CAL FIRE in January of next year. And the last thing that I really has stuck with me over the last 6 months is that you don't choose your battles. Your battle chooses you, and how you act to that and how you fight those is ultimately your choice. That you need to be strong, and it's up to you to break through.